big man on campus in his day, that the history has kind of lost him a little bit. John Winthrop, his session is going to be basically in two parts because that's the way his life was lived. There's a public side and a spiritual side. I want to cover the public side first.
Hey, Darrell, is your microphone on?
Sorry. Okay. John Winthrop, again, was one of the lost founding fathers, the lost Puritans. One thing I need to clear up that I had a misunderstanding about, and I don't know if some of you do or not, but a lot of people get the Pilgrims and the Puritans confused. The Pilgrims were in America 10 years before the Puritans ever showed up. They were very different. The Pilgrims were a small group of separatists that came to America in 1620 to, as their name says, separate themselves from the English government. The Puritans were a larger group who were about 20,000 people, came to America in 1630, but they remained faithful to the Church of England. Although they had the hope of reforming or purifying the church, as their name would say. The church was going into some unbiblical leanings and some political repression that we'll see here in just a few minutes. The Puritans at this time in history thought that because they were deviating from the gospel so much, that God was actually going to punish England, and that God was offering them New England as a refuge from that punishment. A few facts about John Winthrop. He was born January 12, 1587, died March 26, 1649. He came from a wealthy family. His dad was a lawyer. His mother had a lot of property. They owned a big manor house in called Groton in Suffolk. He was trained to be a lawyer like his dad was, although he never went on to the bar. He held a post for the Court of Wards and Liveries. And before he even came to America, he was widowed twice and married Margaret Tyndall in 1618. He was not going to originally take part in this Massachusetts Bay Colony, but in 1629, Charles I, he began a crackdown on nonconformist religious thought, and that's when he decided to sign up and come into the program here. The Massachusetts Bay Company was basically a twofold definition of company. First of all, it came in under a pretense of an economic venture. They came to establish trade in the New World, but it was also a religious venture and a political venture conflated, as we'll see. These Puritans thought they were being persecuted and would be even more persecuted in England, so they were ready to come over here. A clause in their charter, though, gave them a lot of leeway. It didn't say where they were supposed to meet. They did have land granted to them, but it kind of gave them free rein to come up with their own government, their own articles. In 1628, the investors acquired a grant of land between the Charles River and the Merrimack River, which is now modern-day Boston, and they named it the New England Company. In 1629, it was renamed the Massachusetts Bay Company, with this royal charter to govern its territory. In 1630, the first 12 boats came to America. Winthrop arrives on the Arbella without his wife. She came in the second wave, and he was elected as governor. He was eventually served 18 one-year terms as governor from 1630 to 1634, 1637 to 1640, 1642 to 1644, and 1646 to 1649 when he died. He was a respected political figure in England before he came over here, and his wealth and his position gave him a good standing in the Massachusetts Bay Company. His attitude toward governance seems authoritarian. If we were to look at some of the good things about his life and some of the bad things about his life, I think it's going to be evident what was the good part and what was the bad part. His governing was part of the bad part. He resisted attempts to widen voting because at this time the only people that could vote were men, rich men, who were members of the company. You know, their wives couldn't vote, any strangers, visitors could not vote. He didn't want to widen the voting, he didn't want to widen the civil rights beyond this narrow class of religiously approved individuals. He opposed attempts to codify a body of laws that the magistrates would be bound by in the colony. And he also opposed unconstrained democracy, calling it the meanest and worst of all forms of government. And you think about that, and you'll see later on some people that relate to him, how they separate that thought from the way they think. The authoritarian and religiously conservative nature of Massachusetts rule was influential in the formation of neighboring colonies, partly because people were trying to get out of Massachusetts to get away from these laws. You know, when I remember a movie, Laurel and Hardy movie, and I brought this up several times, called Utopia. They're stranded on a desert island, and they think, man, you know, we got it made. We can do what we want to do. You know, we don't have to have all these rules and laws and all that kind of stuff. Well, inevitably, other people are showing up, and anarchy comes into play, and, you know, you got to have rules. Well, that happened in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They had their first round of people that were solid believers. They went along with everything that their leaders said and everything, but then other people started coming in that didn't agree with Winthrop and some of the other leaders. Some of them were Ann Hutchinson, Thomas Hooker, and John Wheelwright. These people all were antinomians. They didn't think you had to follow the rules to be saved. In other words, they would be free grace people, not legalistic like these Puritans of Winthrop's crowd was. These religious controversies came to a head because these people were coming in, they were causing disruption in the colony and everything. And this happened about 1634, 1635. All these people started coming in. John Haynes came in. Henry Vane actually became governor in between the times that Winthrop was governor. They all espoused these religious political views that were at odds with those of those first people that had arrived. Hutchison and Wheelwright especially were very disruptive in the colony. They subscribed to that antinomian view that following religious laws was not required for salvation. This religious rift is commonly called the antinomian controversy. It significantly divided the colony. Winthrop saw the antinomian beliefs as a particularly unpleasant and dangerous heresy. By December of 1636, the dispute reached into colonial politics, and Winthrop attempted to bridge the divide between the two factions. He wrote an account of his religious awakening and other theological position papers designed to harmonize the opposing views. It's not known how widely these documents were circulated, not all of them have survived. But in the 1637 election, Vane was turned out of all offices and Dudley was elected governor. Now, so they put Anne Hutchinson on trial in 1637. On the last day of her trial, she claimed that she had received visions from God which prophesied the destruction of the colony. Winthrop presided over the trial and banished her from the colony. She moved south and in 1638 founded the Portsmouth settlement near Roger Williams' Providence plantation. Other advocates of free grace theology followed her and settled nearby. Dudley's election did not immediately quell the controversy. Again, Wheelwright and Hutchinson were put on trial. Both of them were banished from the colony. Wheelwright founded first Exeter, New Hampshire, and then Wells, Maine, in order to be free of Massachusetts rule. Winthrop was active in arguing against their supporters, but was criticized for being too moderate. And one guy claimed that Winthrop should make their wickedness and guile manifest to all men, that they may go no farther and then will sink of themselves. Hooker and Hayes had left Massachusetts in 1636 and 1637 for new settlements on the Connecticut River, the nucleus of the Connecticut colony. Vane left for England after the 1637 election when he was thrown out, suggesting that he might seek a commission as the Governor General to overturn the colonial government. He never returned to the colony and became an important figure in Parliament before and during the English Civil Wars. He was beheaded after the Restoration. Roger Williams was another one of these guys who'd come in, and though him and Winthrop disagreed, they got along. They agreed to disagree. They kind of became, good buddies. But after the 1637 election, the General Court passed new rules on residency in the colony. They forbid anyone from housing newcomers for more than 3 weeks without approval from the magistrates. Winthrop vigorously defended this rule against protest, arguing that Massachusetts was within its rights to refuse to receive such whose dispositions suit not with ours. Ironically, some of those who protested the policy had been in favor of banishing Roger Williams. In 1635, Winthrop was not governor at that particular time, and he had a good relationship with Williams, so he told Williams, they're coming after you. So that probably made his flight from Massachusetts a possibility, and he established the Providence plantation. Winthrop and Williams continued to have a good relationship through letters until the end of Winthrop's life. So you had all this political stuff going on. He was not that great of a politician, but what happened on the way here is what defines him probably more than anything that he did as governor. Probably one of the things he's best known for, and we'll see why it's been kept alive all these years. A model of Christian charity was a sermon that he wrote and preached on board the Arbella on the way to the New World. It reinforced the tenets of Puritanism and encouraged self-reliance. It prepared colonists for the real-life rigors and dangers of colonial settlement and encouraged interdependence. So the second part, he was a model of Christian ideology in his governing. He's a model of Christian charity in his spiritual life. Again, he was, a wealthy man. They got this charter to come to the Massachusetts Bay Company, and he escorted a group of Puritans here. Was their governor for practically every year, almost every year that he was there. On board the Arbella, he gave this sermon, a model of Christian charity, part of his original handwriting right there. This sermon, again, was looking at his authority and looking at what he was trying to do on the way here to prepare them for what they were going to face. Now, this sermon was taken, the most part of it was from Matthew 5:13 through 15. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. This is famously known as the City on the Hill sermon. It's quoted, quite often by a lot of different people. The summation of it, and this is in Old English here, for we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely without God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. That's what he didn't want to happen, which is why he gave this sermon. These words are a vocational charge upon the community. You'll notice that this parallels the task that laid out to the people of Israel who believed they had a specific duty to serve God. He felt that same way about this undertaking. He felt that they had a commission from God for this to happen. This sermon gave rise to the widespread belief that America is God's country because metaphorically it is a city upon a hill. One guy that I read had this to say about this sermon. He said, John Winthrop's sermon, A Model of Christian Charity, surely ranks among the greatest literary productions of colonial America. More importantly, Christians may well maintain that in it, Winthrop articulates a genuine covenant between the American people and God, inasmuch as we are a self-invented country, free and prosperous to an unprecedented degree. It is both our prerogative and responsibility to create a model society. To do less is to deserve just censure. The ethical message is no less important for non-Christian Americans. One need merely substitute the word conscience for God, and the logic remains intact. For even if other people may forgive our dereliction of duty, conscience cannot. Truly it is said, of whom much is given, much is required. And I have known a man in my life who would tell you that he thought everybody should leave her. He thought the tenants in there lived their life according to the Bible, even though he was not the rules, everything in its complete package was everything you needed to live. And he thought that we should follow those rules and everything. And that's what this guy is saying. Even if you're not a Christian, this message is for you. In the first part of the sermon, if you read this, and I'd encourage you to read it, I think what I pulled off the internet was like 16 pages or something like that, but it shouldn't take you half an hour or so to read it. If you'll see that he's broken it down. In the first part of the sermon, he lays out a set of rules for lending and borrowing amongst the colonists. And then he follows that up with an excellent call for Christian charity or love. That is to be the driving force behind this new endeavor in New England. He lays out before his hearers that in taking on this endeavor, they have made a covenant with God that can only be upheld by their pure love for one another, their care for one another, as they build this new homeland. He quotes passages that make the new colony equivalent to God's relationship with his chosen nation, Israel. With that, he warns them of the consequences of breaking the covenant, not only from being shamed, but also from being driven out of this new homeland. Now, they're coming over here to start as this new company, as they call it. And if you're starting a business, what do you want to be? Successful, right? So he wanted the settlers to be successful, and he understood that they would be under great scrutiny. His directive provided inspiration and caution, noting that the settlers would need to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God if they wanted to succeed. He wrote that for the community to work, we must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work as members of the same body. He puts a lot of emphasis on the church being a body. Talks about the ligaments, that your body has all these different ligaments that hold things together. And if you don't have one of those ligaments, you're in trouble. So every part is important. Every ligament is important. Winthrop knew that the events in New England would be watched not just by England, but by the world. It was in this context that Winthrop noted, "We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." His language made it clear that we were not destined to be a shining example, only that we were destined to be an example, shining or otherwise. We're called to be witnesses for Christ. And we are witnesses for Christ. Every single minute of every day, you are a witness for Christ. But what kind of witness are you? Somebody catch you, as the old song says, losing your religion, that doesn't look good on Christ. Now, John Winthrop had a lot of famous kinfolk that followed him. A couple of the ones that you might know, Charles Eliot was the longtime president of Harvard University. John Carey is a descendant of Winthrop. But then a lot of people have borrowed from Winthrop. Many people probably down through the years that we are not even recorded that we can find have used this sermon in their political aspirations as well as their spiritual aspirations. John Kennedy, before he went to the White House, he spoke to the Massachusetts General Court and gave a speech, and he brought this up. "Today, the eyes of all people are truly upon us, and our governments in every branch at every level, national, state, and local, must be as a city upon a hill, constructed and inhabited by men aware of their great trust and their great responsibilities." Now, this was just like 2 weeks before he was sworn in as the president. Kennedy was aware that institutions are only as noble as those who inhabit them. Ronald Reagan, I found quotes from Reagan dating back as far as 1974, which was nearly 20 years before he became president. And he admitted that he has used this sermon or this idea of a city upon a hill in his life, pretty much all his life. He was a great fan of Winthrop. In his farewell speech on January 11th, 1989, as he left the White House, he talked about our history as a tall, proud city built on rocks, stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace, a city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. Mr. Trump is a fan of Reagan, and he probably can't quote that. Regarding our future, Reagan understood that as long as we remember our first principles and believe in ourselves, the future will always be ours. Echoes, again, of what Winthrop was saying. Reagan, who was known more for his faith in the American people than in the American government, warned that as government expands, liberty contracts. The most recent example of this city on a hill was found in 2011. This is a little movie, it's about an hour long, that Newt Gingrich and his wife put together called A City Upon a Hill, the spirit of American exceptionalism. We'll see this from Winthrop on down to now even, this idea of being a community of believers, taking care of one another, loving one another, bearing each other's burdens and all that, has morphed into this. We're great because we are America. And if I can get this, what I'm going to play for you, if I can get to, is the trailer for this movie. And probably not going to play. Jeremy, if you could help me, or okay. Sorry, I was afraid that might not work, but I'm running out of time anyway. So the thing is, this if you were to watch this, and the trailer is only a couple of minutes long, so I would encourage you to look it up when you get a chance. Basically, it's a rah-rah cheerleading for America being as great as we all want it to be. Like Reagan says, he believes God put this country between these two oceans, and set it apart to be an example. Winthrop had a good idea as far as living in community, caring for one another, loving one another, bearing each other's burdens and all that, and helping each other as they went about this endeavor. When it morphed out of that and became, a bragging right, basically, that's when it went bad. Now, I firmly believe that America should not be a theocracy, but I believe that Scripture doesn't lend itself to that. But the fact that we are to pray for our leaders, as we're told in every Wednesday night prayer meeting, we're to pray for our leaders, so that we can live a peaceable life and have the freedoms that we have. That's fine. I mean, Jesus didn't even tell his people in those days, throw the rascals out, given to Caesar what's due Caesar, given to God what's due God. So this model for Christian charity, I think it was a good start. I think it was a good idea. I just think it was went awry, and it shows itself in his governance. But that's who John Winthrop was. He was just like us. He had his good points and his bad points. And anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
If you don't mind, I'd like to read something really quick. Another famous usage of that sermon. This was the order of the day on June the 6th, 1944, written by Dwight Eisenhower. You're about to embark on the great crusade toward which you have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security of ourselves in a free world.
Thank you.
In Winthrop's time, did you think that he was more Christian or more secular? The general, from what you've studied, from the general idea of what was going on.
I would lean toward the fact that he was more spiritual than secular, partly because he didn't even get involved in this whole undertaking until the king started this crackdown on nonconformist religious thought. You know, he saw that, you know, he was fixing to get caught up. Now, I don't know if he was just trying to save his bacon, you know, or what, but he, that was when he got involved. And this sermon is beautiful. I mean, I've read it and several times. I would encourage you to find it and read it. But I think his heart was in the right place. It's just that maybe he didn't know how to carry it out, because again, in their day, you had these different castes of society. You know, I mean, he knew the poor were there. He knew the slaves were there. He knew the Indians were there, Native Americans. You know, he knew that they were going to have to deal with all that, and he felt, again, that his position and his riches were would serve good in that stead. You know, that he, you know, he could take care of things. But I can't read this sermon without thinking that he was a believer. You know, like I said, he was a bad governor, so maybe his political side had, you know, left a lot to be desired.
You said that a few times. What are a couple of the major things that you didn't like about his governance?
He was very authoritarian, which he, again, given the benefit of the doubt, he may have thought he had to be starting this new work, you know, that somebody had to lead. He was elected governor, you know, right off the bat. And it's just some dumb mistakes that he made and part of it was his spiritual training. You know, the fact that he wouldn't put up with Ann Hutchinson and some of these others that came in. They didn't think the way he thought, so you're out of here, basically, you know. It was like they were building a commune, you know, and only the true core believers could be there. Everybody else had to get out of town. So that was a mistake, I think, but that's maybe the way he was taught. I don't know. Anybody else? All right, let's close in prayer. Our Father and our God, we are grateful, Lord, for another day to be in your house. Lord, we thank you that as we look upon these men, that we can see their strengths, we can see their weaknesses, and but Lord, in all that he did, John Winthrop lifted you up. He wanted the people in this company to be totally dedicated to you, to totally follow your word as far as the love for one another that is required in your word. Lord, that we should take care of one another, carry one another's burdens, that we should lift each other up and put the others around us ahead of us. Father, lift them up, make them more than we are. Lord, we look at those men that went before us, and we see their strengths, we see their weaknesses, and we hopefully can learn something from them. But Lord, help us to live in the time that you've placed us. And Father, that we might, again, go about our daily business. And as I said earlier, we are witnesses for Christ, but let us be careful about how we are witnessing. Lord, our very lives, the words that come out of our mouth that are the issues of our heart. Lord, help us to guard our mouths. Help us to guard our thoughts. Help us to think only on those things that your word tells us we should think on. Father, let us be prepared to face the world. Let us be prepared to face the devil and his wiles. And Lord, we pray that you would keep us from the evil one. And Father, that we are here. Your word that this sermon is based on is true. We are a city on a hill. There are those that are watching, especially our children, our grandchildren. And Father, help us be witnesses there. But Lord, help us not to hide our talents under a basket, but Lord, let it so shine, and let us have a moment of boldness that your name would be lifted up and glorified for Christ's sake. Amen.